Hi, this is Shar from Bricks. In this video, we're going to explore the gradient and overlays feature, showing you how to add and customize gradients in your Bricks projects. Gradients can significantly enhance your site's aesthetics. They add depth to backgrounds, bring focus with image overlays, and make text stand out. We're going to explore how you can achieve these effects. In this video, we'll cover linear, radial, and conic gradients. Each offers a distinct aesthetic, and I'll guide you through how to implement them effectively in Bricks. Starting with linear gradients, we'll work our way through these styles. Also keep an eye out for a special pro tip at the end about meshing gradients for an even more dynamic effect. Before we start, let me show you what I have on this page. So I have 4 sections. The first will have to do with the linear gradient, the second would be the radial, then conic, and then mesh gradient. So before we start with gradients, let's first add an overlay over this section to maybe make this text a bit more visible. To add an overlay or a gradient in Bricks, we'll first click the element, we'll go to the Style tab, and then Gradient Overlay. Here we can choose the type, we have the linear, radial, conic, and here we can start adding colors. We'll get to the other options later on. Let's now add an overlay color. Let's pick maybe this light blue. And as you can see, we can't see the background image anymore. So let's maybe reduce the transparency, but it's still not visible because that's been applied to the background by default. So let's apply this as an overlay. And as you can see, now we can see our background image. We can, of course, play around with the transparency, either reduce it or increase it. So the gradients and overlays are a great way to make text more visible when you have a background image, for example. Now let's make this a gradient by adding 2 colors. And this gradient will be of type linear. A linear gradient creates a straight line transition between colors. It's like a color spectrum flowing in a single direction from one end of the element to the other. So let's add a second color. Let's say we pick this orange right here, and let's also reduce the transparency. As you can see, we now have 2 colors. By default, the first color is starting from the top, and then it flows all the way to the bottom where we have the second color. We can also add a third color. Let's say we go with this purple right here. As you can see, we have 3 colors now, and as you've guessed it, we can keep on adding more and more colors. For simplicity's sake, let's go back to just 2 colors. Now let's discuss this CSS selector control. Here we can apply this gradient on a specific CSS selector, for example, on this button. So for example, we can go .bricks button, and now this gradient will apply to all elements within this section that have this class Bricks button. As you can see, now it's being applied on this button. But what if we wanted to apply this linear gradient only on text? We actually can do that as well. So here we have apply to, we can click here, and as you can see, we also have a text option. Now this linear gradient is being applied to the text. So let's go back to overlay and let's now discuss angle in degrees. As I've mentioned earlier, by default, the gradient will go from top to bottom. But what if we wanted to have a slight angle? So for example, 45 degrees. As you can see now, it's from top right and it goes all the way to the bottom left. You can enable repeat to repeat the gradient pattern, creating multiple stripes of color across the element. When we enable this, nothing changes because we need to add color stops. We can add the color stops to each color here. As you can see, by default, it's going to be a percentage. You use color stops to control where each color in the gradient begins and ends, creating a detailed color transitions. So maybe for the blue, let's go with 10%. And then for the orange, let's go with 20%. And so as you can see, we have this pattern now where it keeps on repeating. Let's now move to radial gradients. Let's add a gradient just like we did previously with a linear. Let's choose type radial. Let's add 2 colors again. As you can probably see, radial gradients emanate from a central point, spreading colors outward in a circular or elliptical shape. It's like a burst of color that radiates from the center, creating a spotlight effect. We can delete this gallery so that it's easier to see. So as you may notice, this shape is elliptical right now, and we can actually change the shape using this option right here to a circle, for example, and now it's a perfect circle. We can also choose the size. Now, radial size determines how your gradient spreads within the element. So let's explore the 4 options. We have closest side. Imagine the gradient stretching just enough to reach the nearest side of the element. It creates a more compact and focused gradient. We also have farthest side. Here, the gradient stretches to touch the farthest side, making a more spread out and softer transition. Third, we have closest corner. This time, the gradient extends to the nearest corner. It results in a gradient that reaches out further than closest side, filling more space. And for the farthest side, this gradient stretches all the way to the farthest corner, ensuring the fullest coverage and the most gradual transition across the element. For the radial gradient, we can also control the position, which basically controls the center of this gradient. So right now it's in the center. We can, for example, choose top left, and now the center is in the top left. You can also choose custom and enter your custom position. In radial gradients, we also have the repeat option, so we can enable this and add some color stops, let's say 5% for the blue, and then maybe 20 for the orange. As you can see, this creates this sort of Looney Tunes kind of gradient. Let's move on to Conic gradient, and let's add the same gradient but with type conic and the same colors. I think it's easier to see the conic gradient with 3 colors, so let's add a third one and let's choose this purple. Conic gradients revolve around a central point. Much like the slices of a pie, they offer a unique way to display color transitions in a circular pattern around a central axis. For conic gradients, we can specify the starting angle. For example, we can go with 45 degrees. As you can see, it starts from 45 degrees. And much like the radial gradient, we can also choose the position, which controls the center. So if I go with top right, you can't really see it. I think it's best to go with bottom left. And yeah, so the center is from the bottom left now. And as you might have guessed it, we also have the repeat option. So let's enable that and let's add some arbitrary stops. For example, 5% for the blue, maybe 10 for the orange, and maybe 35 for the purple. You can play around with all of the controls that we talked about, and for most use cases, these are probably enough. But one thing that is great about Bricks is that it does not limit you. So if you have more advanced requirements or more complex grids, don't be afraid to use custom CSS. You can go to the CSS tab and add your custom CSS to the element here. And I'm actually gonna show you a use case right now. I'm now on csshero.org/mesher, which is a visual tool that allows you to create these so-called mesh gradients visually. So I can move these colors around, I can change the colors as well. And once I'm done, I can click on export, and this generates the CSS for me. And if you've noticed, these are just a couple of radial gradients stacked on top of each other. And what I can do is just copy this. And now I'm back to Bricks Builder. Let's click on the Mesh Gradient section. And I'm not gonna add those tiles to the element itself. I'm actually gonna create a global class first. Let's call this background mesh maybe 1. And then I'm gonna add it to the root. And when I add root or this keyword, it basically means this class right here, background mesh 1. Let's paste our styles. And as you can see, we have our mesh gradients here. And through bricks, since we're applying this to a global class, this means that I can apply this class to any section, either on this page or even a different page, and they'll get this same gradient. The benefit of having this mesh gradient saved in a global class is that I don't have to keep copy and pasting the same styles. Not only that, but let's say later on I wanted to make this move, make this a little bit better. So I went to ChatGPT, asked it to create an animation for this, and let's try and paste it here. And if you can notice, the gradients are sort of moving now. And let's increase the animation time to say 60 seconds. Now it's going to be moving much slower. Let's preview this. It's very subtle, but it's moving very slowly. And since this is stored in a global class, it means that this new animation will also take effect in all instances where this class is being applied. So if another section on a different page also has that class, it will also have this new animation. I would also encourage you to take a look at the documentation by Mozilla regarding CSS gradients, because at the end of the day, all of the options that we have in bricks are just CSS. So understanding the basics of CSS will also help you build websites faster with bricks, because you understand exactly what each control does. This is all for this video. If you need any more information, please refer to our Academy article regarding gradients.